Our movie begins with Pete, an undercover agent for the FBI's New York field office. He's worked his way up the ranks of a well-oiled crime syndicate and is now preparing to hand over solid evidence to his handler in order to indict the crime boss, the general. He tells his wife and daughter that they must leave because the long-awaited surgery has begun. Erica, the Pete's handler, informs her team of the plan, which calls for Pete to deliver the 6 pounds of fentanyl to the general. And that's when they step in. Pete locks his family in a warehouse and hands over the key to his wife. If he is not back by 1 p.m. tomorrow, she has to leave the state. He meets Erica in a torn-down bathroom. She offers him a phone to call in case of an emergency, and she tells him to ask for a smoke and Erica's crew would come to retrieve him. Stacy and Pete are greeted by a diplomat who is in charge of the fentanyl batch. They put the fentanyl in a different suitcase and leave the diplomat at the hotel where he is staying. Stacy goes to get a bottle of bourbon for his uncle, the general. He chooses to surprise Pete with cash instead of fentanyl and tells him he already has a customer. But he doesn't answer because he doesn't want to break his cover. Despite the fact that this throws the entire plan into a loop, Erica chooses to follow them to a club. The buyer is worried and admits that he doesn't have enough money to buy all 6 pounds, but he's good for 3 and can get more money for the other 3, which are worth $85,000. The buyer comes down and starts questioning him about how he'll raise the $85,000 in 2 hours and begins to distrust him. When Stacy goes to take a call, Pete confronts him about being a cop and tells him this is his chance to get out. But the buyer continues to play dumb. He slams him to the ground, and all he has to do now is walk away. On the other hand, he pulls out a gun and a badge and Stacy fires him. Pete is taken aback and announces that he needs to go make a smoke signal for Erica to come in. On the other hand, she abandons the plan and drives past Pete, leaving him to his own devices. He then assists in the bagging and disposal of the body at a sausage plant. Pete is welcomed inside and introduced to the general. He calmly explains to him that a New York cop was killed and that someone must take responsibility if they don't want the NYPD poking their nose where it doesn't belong. Despite the fact that Stacy was the one who killed the cop, the general portrays it as if Stacy saved Pete's life and now owes him his entire life to repay him. To further terrify Pete, he wants him to go to prison and run the drug operation from the inside for 5 years. He has no choice but to think of his family when the general urges him to. Pete and his family are returned to their house, and he makes contact with Erica. She shuts up the phone after telling him she couldn't help him because it would endanger their 4-year plan. He is enraged that Sophia did not leave, but they immediately reconcile and she assists him in washing off the blood. The body is discovered by the police, and Detective Grant, who was good friends with him, sets out to uncover the perpetrator. He soon discovers that his friend's death was linked to a Polish gang. He discovers footage and connects it to Pete's involvement. Pete, Erica, and her boss Montgomery get together and inform Pete that he is in serious trouble. They've tried everything they can to hide it, but it's not working. He wants to escape, but they want to stick to the general's plan and imprison him if he obtains enough proof about the fentanyl distribution network in state jail. He will be set free, but if he refuses, he will be identified as an undercover agent and sentenced to prison for the murder of an undercover cop. There isn't much of an option. In the morning, Pete stores the recordings of his chat with Erica in a box at home. Stacy pays him a visit and gives him fentanyl to smuggle into prison. Sophia learns about Pete's new covert mission from Pete. When they return home, a Polish gang and even the general visit his house, and he spends the entire day with his daughter, taking notes on the layout of the prison. He claims he doesn't have any children since he couldn't bear losing them. With that, he suggests to Pete that if he wants to avoid taking the fall, he should keep his half of the bargain. Pete's house has been under surveillance, and France informs his partner that the general has left. He plays the abusive husband the next day, while Sophia contacts the cops to have him arrested. Grant watches Pete being arrested and transported to prison. Pete is taken to his bunk bed by a crooked guard who greets him kindly. Although it is surrounded by African Americans, one of the inmates pays the guard to release bunk bed slots for his gang, ensuring Pete's safety during the night raid. When the warden arrives at Erica's request, he places him in a cleaning program. Pete meets his Polish prison gang members and is assigned a shift to prepare for an impending brawl. Branch pays Erica a visit and inquires about Pete, but she is evasive. Montgomery enters and attempts to calm the scene by stating that they have no ties to Pete. However, after showing them photos of Pete and Erica obtained by a security camera on the day Grant's friend died, he warns them that there will be a fight between the FBI and the NYPD, and they will be in serious trouble if they are connected to Pete in any way. Sophia follows Pete's directions on how to deliver the supplies to the prison using the drone and lands the bird on the prison's roof. Pete cleans the roof as part of the cleaning program in the morning and is able to retrieve it. Grant pays Sophia a visit at her employment in order to learn more about Pete. He's not sure if Pete is the murderer at this point. Sophia tells him he can't assist them and to get out of there. Grant gives her his card and tells her to call him if she changes her mind. Following that, Friends talks with Pete through one of his informants, telling him that he will no longer have his gang in the yard at some point. The dishonest guard brings Pete to the African-American gang boss Phelps, who controls the prison's drug trade and believes Pete is stepping on his toes, and if he wants to survive, his only option is to signal that he's willing to talk about the undercover cop's death. Phelps and his men attempt to assassinate Pete until he discloses that he is an undercover FBI spy working to bring the general down. Phelps offers to provide him with information if he is still alive once he is released. Meanwhile, back at FBI HQ, Montgomery asks Erica to kill Pete and halt any operations involving the general because Grant is closing upon them and Pete is an unofficial informant. If the NYPD finds out what happened in the room where the undercover cop was shot, she would lose not just her job, but also her life. If she refuses to obey, Montgomery guarantees she'll be the sacrificial lamb since she tried too hard to impress her bosses. Pecos needs to go to the bathroom at night when one of Phelps' men approaches him and gives him the names of persons in charge of the prison's distribution network. He becomes agitated. Later, he phones Erica and informs her that he has worked out the general's entire network and that she should get him out. He's in danger, but Erica refuses to help him because she's been instructed to, and she'd rather save her own life. Pete dials Sophia's number once more. He demands that she hand him the videos of his interactions with Eric and her grandson. Get out of the state. Erica approaches the general's lawyer, who informs her that Pete is a double agent. She confronts Sophia and takes the tapes after that. Her phone call with Pete was overheard by the FBI. Erica, who is plagued by guilt, listens to the tapes and hears herself swear to protect Sophia and his daughter in prison. Phelps' men signal that one of them has been burned. He gets ready for a fight, but his ship goes lost as he searches for it. He is assaulted by a member of a Polish gang. Pete has the upper hand and strangles him. When the corrupt guard arrives on the scene, he appears on video to notify the guards. He succeeds in kidnapping him and holding him prisoner, demanding that he speak to the press and his wife. He then proceeds to a deserted tower and kills the guard. With his previous expertise as a U.S. Army sniper, he takes the radio to see whether his demands are met and marks the lookout angles from the windows. In the meantime, Stacy confronts Pete's family, who are just on the phone with Detective Grant moments before Grant arrives at Pete's house and kills one of his men. As he moves up the stairwell, he is shot in the leg. He does not retaliate in the same way that he does not shoot back. It has a captive and loses his gun because he hesitates just as Stacy is about to finish off Grant. Sophia manages to break free and shoots herself at the prison, but he stays in the back. Snipers have taken up position, and Montgomery comes on the scene, ready to issue the order to shoot Pete as soon as possible. Pete's demands are being met by the warden. Pete contacts his wife and tells her that he is going to get himself out of this mess. Montgomery interrupts the discussion. Pete appears to be holding the guard captive for the snipers while also changing his clothes. He then awakens him up, allowing the corrupt guard to kidnap him, and then reveals himself to the snipers, who shoot and puncture one of the CO2 tanks. Pete is able to flee, and the tank explodes just after Erica arrives to discover the prison engulfed in flames. When the firefighters in the guard's uniform take Pete to the ambulance, Montgomery informs her that the job is finished. She recognizes him and enters with him. After all, she intends to assist Pete by faking his kidnapping of everyone, handing him a message and a phone, and sending him on his way. Erica encounters Montgomery on a ship sometime later and claims to know Pete's whereabouts. He tells her that he wants her to kill him. Erica has been wiretapped and has alerted the NYPD about Montgomery's unethical operations. Thus, it turns out to be a setup. Pete goes to see his family, but when Erica sees him, she warns him that there are many undercover officers on the scene. France approaches him and hands him fake American documents, telling him he needs to hide for a bit until things calm down. Before heading back into hiding, he makes one last eye contact with Sophia. We hope that you enjoy your time and have a good day.